Coming up on this week's episode of the Wisden Cricket Weekly Podcast, we look ahead to James Anderson's 188th and final test for England.
Going back to that test match in 2003, we bowled some incredible deliveries, turning batters into an S, starting the ball off on outside leg stump and hitting the top of off. He is undoubtedly a legend.
Now, a lot of people say Anderson's still arguably England's best bowler, certainly the most skillful bowler, so therefore it was too early to kick him out. I think the fact that he's hoovering up wickets in county cricket, albeit bowling exceptionally well, doesn't mean that England have made the wrong call.
There's a preview ahead of the first test of the series against West Indies at Lords.
There's an assumption, probably a lazy one, and an arrogant one, that England will just kind of sweep past West Indies and Sri Lanka this summer. I don't think there's any guarantee, particularly the way England play. They could absolutely implode against either of those two teams.
Jamie Smith, England's new test keeper, speaks to Jo Harman.
As I said, it's a great opportunity. I'm not sure when I'm out there with all the nervous energy and excitement, I'll be worrying too much about fatigue. I think it will be a great occasion and something I'm really looking forward to.
And there's reflection on a remarkable round of county championship action.
Because Glamorgan needed one run to win and had one wicket left, wicketkeeper James Bracey had taken off one of his gloves so that he could throw down the stumps in anticipation of a bye. But then Jamie McIlroy, the number 11, gets a pretty thick edge on it, so he then has to dive and take an absolutely brilliant catch one-handed.
All that and more coming up in the next 70 minutes or so.
This summer, Wisden are proudly sponsored by Kia UK. Kia are leading the way in electrification with their groundbreaking range of EVs. They've taken strides in the future of mobility with their award-winning lineup, including the EV9 and EV6. They also have a commitment to movement that inspires and want to help cricket fans get closer to the action. Listen every week for Kia's Movement That Inspires moment for chances to win exciting experiences at the Kia Oval this summer. A few hours after we recorded, England announced their 11 for the first test, confirming that Jamie Smith and Gus Atkinson will both debut with Chris Woakes as the third seamer in the 11 aside from Atkinson and a retiring Anderson. Most of our chat is still relevant, but please do bear in mind that we didn't know the 11 when we were discussing it. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. Tomorrow, the great James Anderson will play his 188th and final test at Lords. We'll be previewing the first test of the English summer, looking back at Anderson's career, argue over whether the push has come too early, and talk about the biggest moments from the latest round of county championship action and more. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Jo Harman and Ben Gardner. Mark Butcher will be joining us later in the show. Jo, let's start with Anderson firstly on what he has just done rather than what might happen this week. Warming up for his first and final test of the summer, he took 7 for 35 in the first innings against Notts, his first bowl of the year. As absurd as this is to ask, given that he turns 42 this month, has the push come too early?
I think you can make that case. I don't think anything that happened at Southport last week changes that, really. I think, the reasoning was that at some point England need to move on from him, and with basically, not that they're saying this specifically, but with an Ashes tour around the corner, it needs to happen sooner rather than later to let these new fast bowlers bed in, get some caps under their belt before that tour. Now, a lot of people say, Anderson's still arguably England's best bowler, certainly the most skillful bowler. So therefore, it was too early to kick him out. I think the fact that he's hoovering up wickets in county cricket and bowling, albeit bowling exceptionally well, doesn't mean that England have made the wrong call. But there's an assumption, probably a lazy one, and an arrogant one, that England will just kind of sweep past West Indies and Sri Lanka this summer. I don't think there's any guarantee, particularly the way England play. They could absolutely implode against either of those two teams. And if England comes to the end of the summer and they've either failed to beat one of those teams or both West Indies and Sri Lanka, then there will understandably be a lot of criticism about the fact that Anderson has been moved on and that the new players who are being blooded aren't necessarily ready to take over quite yet. You look at the bowlers that have been picked, they're punts, really. You've got to say, based on their first-class record, Pennington has only really come through this year. Atkinson has not played much red ball cricket at all. There's clearly a lot of talent there, and they've identified them as the type of bowlers that they want. But at this stage, they are punts.
Ben, do you think the equation is slightly different now to what it might have been when the decision was actually made, in that they don't trust Ollie Robinson's fitness? He's someone with an outstanding test record. Chris Woakes has played barely any cricket this summer, and since he's come back has been a bit rusty. He went wicketless in that game against Somerset that we'll get onto later. Jofra Archer's not playing Test cricket this summer. Mark Wood's not in this squad. Stuart Broad retired last year. You know, it's not as if England have loads of options. I think Joe's right to say that some of these picks are punts, informed punts, but they are punts nevertheless.
Yeah, and actually adding into that, if you were looking for, you know, the most, the Anderson replacement in the county circuit, that would be Sam Cook, but he's got a bit of a niggle as well, so he's going to be, out for the first, couple of tests at least. And then you've also got Josh Tongue, who, this time last year, people would have maybe said that he was a guy who could do a few different roles of the ball. He could have formed a pretty important part of an attack, but that he's got a pectoral injury that looks like it's going to keep him out for quite a long time. And then he also even like further down the pecking order, like even a guy like Bryden Cass, who people, he hadn't had a great start to the year, but people were thinking that this was a guy that at some point England might like to have a look at. He's, he's now serving out this ban for the rest of the summer. So yeah, that does change the equation a little bit, but also I think that there's a side of it that's like just the pure kind of hard-nosed side of it, which is and just looking at the bowling attack where they want to see who those new options are and how they go. And from that point of view, there's a few less, and you might wonder, if someone else goes down or Wood doesn't get ready for that third test, and then England happen to lose one of the first two, and all of a sudden you're going into a deciding test of a series, and they could have had Anderson around for it, and they don't. That is the risk. But they've also just they also want, from a more general point of view, they do want this to be a bit of a reset. I think like a sort of soft reset. You've had the kind of the first stage of the Brendan McCullum era ended with that, the back-to-back test series against Australia and India, and the second half of it, and it probably will be a second half, I can't imagine them going on longer than it, will end with India and Australia. And so this is the chance to do that. And so it's almost more like you might also argue, England's squad doesn't really have a backup keeper at the moment. So, there's Ollie Pope in there, and, Ben Duckett's done it. But, if you're picking a squad, they might be like, oh, well, let's, have Bairstow in there, but he make clear as a backup. But no, they want to make sure that these are the guys we think are going to carry us onwards, and they want that to like be the feeling for the start of this summer. And obviously Anderson gets the one test, and then that really kicks into gear. So that is a slight concern for England, but also, even though we're saying that, and Chris Wokes, we've seen in the past, has often taken a bit of time to get back, sort of to sort of full bowling form at times, which is, that's just a thing that he has. That was oddly not the case last summer, but that has often been a thing for him. But still, you look at that squad, and there is still good bowling in there, and they would still think that, they've picked Dylan Pennington because they think he's ready to play Test cricket, so they won't have worries from that point of view so much. It's more like if there's like one or two more that go down, then it's like, oh, now we are in a bit of a spot, I guess.
And Anderson's mentoring role only kind of adds to this, because his absence will be felt even more keenly by the fact he will still be present. So, if he's, and I think it's a great idea to keep him involved in that sense, but
you fear it will be a bit Man United when Fergie left, and
exactly.
Every new manager, every time it goes wrong, they pan to Fergie in the crowd,
exactly
looking disapprovingly, and Anderson will be next to McCullum. I think the one thing, I've made this point before, but I think it is worth making every time there's clamour for Anderson to remain, is I do think there are cricketing reasons for why Anderson should be playing less Test cricket now, even when you're not looking to the future. His numbers are always tidy, but there's been an issue where, because of his physicality and his ability to endure throughout a test match, he just bowls less and less as a test match progresses. So his numbers in India were tidy, but he didn't actually bowl that many overs. And in second innings for quite a long time now, he has not been anywhere near as effective as he is in first innings. So at home, over the last 4 years, a run stretching 19 test matches, his second innings average is 52. And I don't think it is just about the Ashes. There are 5 test matches at home to India next year as well. So I do think it's understandable why England are looking to the future. Who do you think will be in the England attack alongside him? Because they've got a few other seamers in there. I think Bashir will play. So Anderson, Bashir +2 probably.
Yeah. Key was asked in the press conference afterwards whether Dan Lawrence might kind of sneak in as an extra batter who bowls a bit of spin, but it was pretty clear, I think, that they want to pick a specialist spinner. My inclination is that with Anderson there, Wokes won't play until the second test onwards, But we have got the perennial issue that no one else is a number 8 among the fast bowlers, really. Gas Atkinson's shown a bit of talent with the bat, but you'd say he's probably...
Potts got a century of the night watchman early this season.
He did, that is true. And actually Stokes talked him up quite a lot as a batter when he first got picked 2 years ago, said he was good enough to bat 8. I think, again, 8 is a push. I think in time could be a decent number 9. But they might think against West Indies, those runs aren't necessarily that valuable. We're better off just picking our best bowlers. So my guess would be Anderson, Pennington, and then I'm not sure about Potts or Atkinson, but I feel like Pennington's going to play. I think the way Key talks about him, I think he wants to see him play Test cricket now. Albeit that would be leapfrogging Atkinson, who I kind of forgot was on that India tour, but just didn't play and seemingly wasn't ever likely to.
Yeah, I think with Atkinson, they view him and Pennington as fulfilling different roles, and they see Atkinson as predominantly a first change bowler. So I feel like it's almost Atkinson versus Potts and Wokes versus Pennington.
Yeah, and in Potts' favour, he had that brilliant debut at Lord's 2 years ago, almost to the day, where he took 4 for nothing in the first innings. I think he took 7 in the match there. So that might work in his favour. Potts, again, hasn't had a fantastic year. He started off really slowly, struggled with the Kookaburra ball, which a lot of English seamers did. I think he's averaging 30, 33 or something in red ball cricket this summer, which is not bad, but Potts for the last few years has been, eating up wickets, very low average. So you wouldn't say he goes into this test series in prime form as well. And we're looking at Wokes, 1 wicket at 220 so far this summer. So, I think we want to see England tested against West Indies. And I think particularly that first test with some bowlers feeling their way back into form, this is West Indies' best chance, I think, in that first test.
It's worth saying with Potts that, because I had kind of got the impression around maybe last summer that England felt they'd kind of had quite a good look at him and probably felt that he was maybe a useful squad option, but that he didn't quite have what it needed right then, even though he had that brilliant start to his Test career. But I think maybe what's changed their minds was his work on the tour of India with England Lions earlier this year when he was brilliant. And I think
he had a really good record out there, didn't he?
Yeah. And Keaton Jones has spoken on this podcast about the new things he'd added to his game. And then also, out of all of England's bowlers, I think in some ways even more than Wokes, he's brilliantly skillful, but is sometimes not super accurate. Potts is the most accurate, and that is actually, England will miss that from Anderson almost as much as his skill, like just his pure accuracy. And Potts just, out of it, if you could pick anyone who is he's just in that it's like 82 miles per hour, which is probably almost like the minimum England would ever consider almost someone being, I think, to playing Test cricket. But if he's that, but he's got that that nagging accuracy that I think England will almost miss more from Anderson than his ability to have that skill with the new ball as well, I think.
And you'd think that is where the door will open for Sam Cook surely at some point this summer.
Lords should be buzzing. It's going to be one of the great farewells. I can't remember. I guess Alistair Cook's last Test match is probably the most comparable thing, but given it's the first Test of the summer, it feels more of an exhibition almost than any of the other ones.
Yeah, it does feel odd. Obviously, Broad's worked out so perfectly for him, and the mid-match thing only kind of added to the drama, as we've had this kind of, when was it? 6 weeks? Or
it's been something like that, yeah.
This run-in, Anderson's played enough Test cricket, I'm sure he'll manage, but it's a lot of pressure on him to go out and bowl well. But he seems in decent nick, judging by Southport last week. And it's not really Anderson's style to like the whole kind of pomp and ceremony around him, whereas Broad, obviously, that suits him quite nicely. So it might be quite an awkward few days for Anderson as well.
It's what's so funny, just the way it's worked out. What if you said Broad and Anderson, one of them's gonna kind of sign off mid-Test match when everyone's sort of really focused on the result, and the other one's gonna sign off 6 weeks in advance and have a massive build up to a Test that's all about him. You wouldn't have picked which way around.
Definitely. Go. And this isn't the way, we know this isn't the way that Anderson wanted it. He'd have probably carried on playing for as long as he possibly could before someone said this was the time. I think that the argument that he could have seen out this summer and played a few Test matches and been part of the group and then had the big valedictory Test match at the end of the summer, if England don't go that well, I think that might gather a bit of pace. But I think they've made the right call in at least saying we're going to move on this summer. At which point of the summer, I think that's more debatable.
This week, we're looking back at particular moments in time in association with Rado, the first official timing partner of the ECB. In this week's podcast, it's only right to look at Jimmy Anderson's greatest moment in an England shirt. Here is Mark Butcher on Anderson's greatest moments. Butcher's going to be a special occasion at Lord's this week. Jimmy Anderson playing his 188th and final Test match. You were there when it all began, not just his Test debut, but his international debut when he was sort of parachuted in mid-tour of Australia. And back then you had ODI series in the middle of Test series. So whilst you guys were playing the Ashes, there were some ODIs in the middle. And he made his debut on that tour. What was the chat around Jimmy back then, this pink-haired 20-year-old who bowled quickly, been around the professional game for 5 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, the hair was kind of definitely the only loud thing about him, really. You think about what he was like as a person in the dressing room. Very, very quiet, very, very shy, kept himself to himself, pretty much. And of course, he was incredibly young as well. So all of those things added together meant that barring the hair, you would barely have noticed him. But what you did notice when he played, I think I remember, was it a one-day international at Adelaide, maybe, where he bowled his 10 overs for next to nothing. Bowled quickly, seemed to have terrific control and movement. And you kind of thought, well, he's an incredibly talented lad. The fact that 21 years later he's still doing it is something that nobody would have been able to have predicted from back then. Of course, he was quicker too, right at the very beginning. Much, and probably for about the last, you'd probably say 10 years, I suppose. He's been fast medium, but he was genuinely quick in the early part of his career, and I suppose he swapped the pace for incredible skill as he went along. But going back to that Test match in 2003, he bowled some incredible deliveries. Turning batters into an S, starting the ball off on an outside leg stump and hitting the top of off, that type of thing, all at a really good lick. And England felt, or we felt, as though, wow, you got a really talented kid here. But of course, he was stick thin. And very, very young, and so the thought was perhaps that he's probably going to snap in two at some point and never to be seen again. That did happen, but the never to be seen again part didn't.
Even when he was fit in that first Test summer in 2003, there were glimpses of what would to come afterwards. But he found it pretty tough, in that South Africa series in particular, up against Graham Smith, who scored millions and millions of runs. Yeah. He was still a long way off the finished article.
Yeah, a long, long way off. I mean, it probably wasn't another 5-6 years before he started to be the really consistent performer that we know today. And all sorts of things happened, didn't they, during that particular period of time? There was the sort of the attempt to change his bowling action so that he wasn't looking down at the point of release, and that kind of it messed with his rhythm. It actually kind of caused back injuries, and he lost a lot of his confidence during the course of that period of time. With bowlers, yes, there are little wrinkles that can be ironed out or need to be ironed out, but sometimes the natural way of doing things is best. And he certainly, once he was sort of more mature and and knew himself a little bit better, he was able to sort of say, no, this is how I've always done it. This is what works. I don't need to be looking at exactly where I'm putting the ball to know exactly where I'm putting the ball. And from that moment onwards, we started to see the bowler that we know today.
He spent a few years in and out of the side before really establishing himself in the 11 against New Zealand in 2008, first at home, where him and Stuart Broad came into the England team for Gardner and Harman to the 2005 Ashes heroes. And it was an instant success, but in that home summer that followed, there was one particularly eye-catching performance at Lord's. What's quite interesting, at Trent Bridge against New Zealand. What's quite interesting looking back at that is the wickets, the style of those wickets, quite similar to how he established himself at the very beginning, like really eye-catching wicket-taking balls that swung miles. I guess it's interesting looking back how he evolved as a bowler, because even then in 2008 he was predominantly pitch the ball up, swing. And we know as time went on, under Strauss's captaincy in particular, I guess, he became someone who was obsessed with control. And Alistair Cook talks about how he would always want Jimmy to just pitch it up a little bit more. That was an interesting transition that took quite a few years to take place.
Again, I think that pace comes into that a little bit. I think again, in the early days when he was, he's capable of touching 90 miles an hour or was, generally around 85 plus, he could afford to pitch the ball up that little bit further, make it swing later. And, that's where those incredible, pitch leg hit off deliveries would come from. He then was able to do that later on, perhaps more with reverse swing as he went along, get that sort of really lavish and late swing. But as the pace dropped off a little bit, he then, the length has to come back with that a touch, and the control has to become greater. And there's no question, once he added the wobble seam delivery, he's never lost the ability to be able to move the ball in and out at will, with very little change in terms of the bowling action, the height of the arm, the wrist even doesn't give away too many clues. But then he also was able to take wickets on, when the atmospheric conditions didn't allow for swing. And suddenly you had, somebody who was became a terrific line bowler, who would be able to move the ball off the seam and didn't rely upon it swinging in order to be able to get people out.
The stick that people used to beat him with was his record away from home. That's something that he put right in the second half of his career. He's had an outstanding record in Asia. MS Dhoni said he was a difference between the two sides in England's win there in 2012. He was always brilliant in the UAE and even recently in Pakistan. One of your favourite Anderson spells was on a tour that you were working on out in India in 2021, bowling England to victory on the final day when he was 38.
Yes, yeah, in Chennai. I mean, that stands out in a lot of ways, actually. Not least because it kind of ushered in the era of India playing on really big turning pitches. If you remember, Chennai was the first Test match of that COVID affected series. Joe Root made a brilliant double 100. England piled on the runs on a traditionally sort of flat surface, and then come the final innings when England had to knock India over. It was Jimmy Anderson with extraordinary sort of burst of Akram and Waqar Yunis style reverse swing. It was only 3 for, yes, but the dismissals and the manner of them was incredibly eye catching. And of course, he's been doing it for 20 odd years, so it helped that I was there because the rest of them all kind of meld into one. Over 700 wickets, it's difficult to pinpoint things, but when you're actually sort of there and calling the game live, that type of skill against those type of batters on what was essentially a very, very flat pitch still, just showed you that he was so far away from being sort of the needing cloud cover and English conditions, that sort of stick that he has been beaten with, so far away from that being true. I mean, I guess the only thing the only thing on his CV that perhaps isn't there is a sort of a dominant Ashes series away from home. I think neither there or South Africa really saw the best of James Anderson. But if you're able to bowl and have economy rates of less than 3 and knock over the best batters in the world in the subcontinent, then you're doing something right.
Yeah, he had decent but not outstanding tours Australia in the second half of his career. I guess what is quite interesting is that if you go back a few months and we're doing tributes on Stuart Broad, we don't have to think for very long to recall the spells that define him. With Anderson, let's be honest, it is actually slightly more difficult doing that. I guess that part of why they work so well as a duo is that they did complement each other really well. Anderson was someone who basically never was less than 6 or 7 out of 10. And the control he had sort of opened the door for whoever was bowling at the other end. And for so long, that was Stuart Broad. And actually, as a partnership, there's a reason why it worked for so well for so long.
Yeah, exactly that. And you're right. So Broad's sort of hot streaks are a thing of legend, aren't they? And you can recall. I can recall most of them at the drop of the hat when you sort of said, have a think about some of Jimmy's spells over the years. I was kind of scratching my head a little bit, which is not to say that, that he wasn't anywhere as good a bowler, but on the contrary, just a different type of bowler, different type of thing for a captain to have, where you could kind of plug him in and forget about him at one end. He would build pressure, yes, and he would get out the best players. I mean, you can think of deliveries, the famous, infamous Michael Clarke delivery, where he points at the top of off stump after he's turned him round and knocked him over. There are all kinds of moments like that throughout his career, but very rare. Jimmy was not somebody that kind of got on a 5-6 over spell and took 8 for. It never happened. His best was 7 anyway. But what he would do was mercilessly sort of top and tail the innings, knock over the top order, get out important wickets through the middle, and gather his wickets in an incredibly consistent way. I think that's the most thing. Very rarely go a test match without taking 3 or 4 wickets, and that's how you end up with 700. And the other thing I think is it's still mind-boggling that he's still able to compete at that level at that age. Is just astonishing over that many test matches. What is it, 188th? This one is going to be. It's quite remarkable. I remember when Alan Border kind of went past 150, 160, and you're kind of thinking, oh my God, that's that is extraordinary in terms of the longevity and the will to kind of keep driving yourself and keep getting out there, keep fielding for days on end. But for a fast bowler to do it is just utterly extraordinary.
And also he's done that. Obviously, he's not had that many serious injuries in the last 10 years. But he has had quite a lot of injuries that have ruled him out of various series. I think back to 2019 Ashes. You're basically ruled out of the marquee series completely on the first morning of it. Yet he's come back from those. They're not minor injuries because they ruled him out of entire tours. But for him to be able to come back physically as well as mentally, actually, I think it's worth saying. And he's been pushed out in the month that he turns 42, and he's still not happy about it. That's ridiculous. That's totally ridiculous. He still wants to be there.
The mental side of it is quite extraordinary. I mean, he is unbelievably steely. Has an incredible work ethic, clearly, and just absolutely loves being out there bowling. I mean, playing cricket. I think part of the disappointment for him will be missing out on putting the shirt on and going out there and performing. Regardless of whether people might think it's a good or bad idea at the moment, I happen to think it's not. I think it's the right time, and it's a wonderful way of top and tailing the career. Start at Lords, finish at Lords. But for him, it will still sting because he misses that competition. He misses the combat himself and the best batters in the world going head to head. And so that'll be something that'll be tough for him to replace, I think.
Well, he's got 700 wickets at 26 from 6,646.1 overs. A few more to come, I'm sure, in the next few days. Butch, cheers for your time. It'll be fascinating to see how he goes this week at Lords.
Yeah, absolutely. He is undoubtedly a legend.
You can discover the Rado Captain Cook high-tech ceramic Rado England Cricket Limited edition watch, the Swiss watchmaking technology masterpiece limited to 150 pieces that celebrates the collaboration of Swiss watch brand Rado and England Cricket. Don't miss your chance to own this exceptional and unique timepiece. Visit rado.com now to secure yours or explore Rado's authorised retailers. Ben, how do we see this series going? West Indies got that win at the Gabba early this year, but even without Kemar Roach in their attack, it's a fiery attack, and they always do better than people expect against England. People are sort of lazily assuming England will win this 3-0. The last 2 times West Indies came here, they won individual test matches, and the last 2 times England have been in the West Indies have won the series.
Yeah, and obviously Kemar Roach is a big blow, but they're going to have Jaden Seals back in the side for this series, and he is properly exciting. I mean, he was kind of the Shamar Joseph before Shamar Joseph came along, in that he was brought into the side without much first class experience at all, and was instantly, even before his debut in Bishopton, marked him out. It was a 19 World Cup. There's just a video of him saying, like, this kid is ready, basically, and he's rarely wrong about these sorts of things. And then it was, I think, his second or third test match against
second test match
against Pakistan, which was an absolutely brilliant game. And he was at the he was player of the match in the game, and he was at the crease when they won it by 1 wicket. And that was one of those sort of like all West Indies are a slightly sort of awakening from a slumber. And actually, in Test cricket, there have just been a few of those moments, and they are now like there were times when you wondered if they were going to sort of like keep slipping down to like the point of like, maybe like a Zimbabwe or whatever. But actually, they have sort of slotted themselves inside the ranks of maybe like the Sri Lanka level teams who, compete against the best teams on their day, are pretty hard to beat at home, obviously have their flaws, but will pose a challenge. And that attack is going to be Alzari Joseph, Jaden Seals, Shamar Joseph, and Jason Holder. Like, even with Jason Holder in there, the average speed is going to be comfortably quicker than England's, and it's going to be also like 3 really, really attacking bowlers against an England team that's also going to attack.
That's going to be so fun to watch.
Yeah, like England batting in this series is going to be box office because of how West Indies will bowl as well. Obviously, as always with West Indies, the concern is the batting, and they're going to have at least an untested opener, having looked like they found one in Tejnarayan Chanderpaul. He was the first opener apart from Craig Brathwaite to make 100 for West Indies in over a decade, but has then just lost all form, and so they're going to have to go to someone else. A few guys got runs in that warm-up game against a county select 11.
Very inexperienced side there against, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's hard to take too much from that, but I think it's more if you almost play yourself out of the sides, and there's Zachary McCaskey and Mikael Louis who are competing to open with Craig Brathwaite, and neither of them have got any experience really at all. McCaskey only debuted last year. Mikael Louis debuted in February this year. He's only played 7 first-class matches.
Debuts this year.
Yeah, he's got 300s in 7 games, so he's obviously made a great start.
Yeah.
But and I think he'd be the first player from St Kitts to play Test cricket.
He would be, and there's a lot of excitement about him back there because of this. So they've already named the south stand of their cricket stadium after him.
Wow,
and
that's a bit of pressure, isn't it?
Given him a plot of land, and there's already a Mikael Louis road as well.
Really?
In
He's not even made his debut
Oh,
yet.
well, they'd better pick him
Wow.
then, hadn't they? But also, McCaskey failed twice in that game. So if you fail twice in the lead up and you haven't got much cricket behind you, and Louis got a half century in the first inning, so you'd think he might well open the batting with Brathwaite. And Athanazi got some runs, which is good to see because I'm looking forward to watching him.
Brian Lara's favourite player.
Yeah, I guess you got to listen to Brian.
And Louis' brother is also in the squad. Jeremiah Louis is a late call-up, I think, as a replacement for Kimorach. So I guess he probably won't play. That attack looks like it'll be 4 quicks, which will be very fun.
It feels like the series, how West Indies batters go, will define the series, because you can see West Indies rolling England over at least a couple of times this series, but it's like, can they, across a test match, score enough runs against what is quite a green England attack, Anderson side? I don't think it's going to be as straightforward as, even if England do win 3-0, I don't think it's going to be as smooth as people might have necessarily predicted so far.
Yeah, and I hope it isn't. I think, we saw this last summer in the Ashes. It was almost like there were 2 completely different ways of playing Test cricket between the 2 sides, and you saw that when England were batting, it was just a completely different game to when Australia were batting. And I think that's going to be even more exaggerated in this series. West Indies aren't going to score their runs quickly. If Brathwaite, you would put quite a bit of money on him being their leading run scorer in this series, and we know that he goes about his game in a pedestrian way, but that suits him. And I think it'll be really fascinating seeing those 2 different strategies, and it will mean that if it goes wrong for England and West Indies do make some runs, then there'll be a lot of criticism immediately at England's door for, the usual being too rash, not playing Test cricket like you should do. There is definitely an opening there for West Indies.
And if we're talking about just other batters in that side as well, like obviously we've seen what Josh De Silva can do against England. He was really important in that series sealing victory in the Caribbean last time. And then him and Cavum Hodge, who will play in this as well. Obviously that test in the Gabba, we just remember, Shamar Joseph, but that was a brilliant test all the way through. And those 2, on the first morning, you think, okay, this thing's going to be over quite quickly. They're 64 for 5, and then put on about pretty much 2 sessions or a session and a half, put on 150, and that's actually what sets up the game for them. So they also have that as a sign that those are 2 players who did it against a really good attack in tough conditions.
This feels like quite a big series for England. Neil asks, are we really that privileged to watch the Test side fail to win a series since 2022? And I think Ben made the point before we started recording that there's quite a lot of people have realised actually England are the bottom of the World Test Championship table. And England, the PR around them is quite persuasive. But actually, it's been a while since they've won a series.
Yeah. What do you think back to England slipping to the bottom of the rankings in 1999 and the way that was received? And here we're talking about the saviours of Test cricket who are bottom of the World Test Championship table.
They are third in the Test team rankings though, and the World Test Championship is very strange when you're at the halfway point.
And also, it's the penalty points that have really cost them in that. And maybe we'll talk a bit more about the World Test Championship, but Joe on England is worth it for now, I think.
Well, no, but I mean, I was going to ask you actually, because we've got 4 series before England have 4 more series before the end of the cycle, right? So they've got West Indies, Sri Lanka, and they've tour Pakistan and New Zealand. If they were to win all 4 series, are they still in contention, or is basically the World Test Championship gone again for England this time round?
So I think basically it'll be the penalty points that cost them. I think that it wouldn't be totally out of the range of possibility that if they were to win all those 4 and maybe won 5 and drew one of the ones this summer and then won those 2-1 overseas or something, that would put them in contention, especially because Australia and India still have to play each other. So one of those sides will drop down. But I think the penalty points, which basically meant that, I think it was their points haul from last summer's Ashes was worse than if they had been beaten 4-1, I think, because of the amount of over 8 penalty points they accrued. And I think that is just, I think that to me that's a flaw of the over 8s. We don't need to talk about over 8s right now. And then also with England in the World Test Championship, like it is sort of fair to point to them being bottom, but also England's issue in the World Test Championship, and you can fairly say this is Australia and India's issue as well, but England are always going to play 2 5-test series against Australia and India in every World Test Championship cycle, and we know it's weighted by test, not by series, as was originally the case, and that is going to hold them back. The flip side
especially
of that,
if that includes a tour to India, is always going to,
or a tour to Australia.
Well, either or.
The flip side of that is that why India and Australia have been the 2 best sides in the first 2 cycles is that they blow sides away at home in a way that England don't. And so if England ever want to win a World Test Championship, they're going to need to win summers like this 6-0. But
yeah, that is actually competitively, if you compare England to the other members of the big 3, that is where England falls short, is that they are not as dominant at home. They're pretty good historically in not losing series. They don't blow teams away in the same way that India and Australia tend to do. Obviously, Australia didn't do that last Australian home summer. For this episode's Kia's Movement That Inspires moment, Kia, proud sponsors of Surrey County Cricket Club, are giving you the chance to win 4 tickets to their final home Vitality Blast fixture against Hampshire on the 18th of July. It's your final chance to experience the electric atmosphere of the Blast with your family and friends at the iconic Kia Oval. For a chance to win, all you need to do is enter via the link in the description. Paul asks, is this a must-do-well series for anyone in the team? Pope's been poor of late in terms of county championship and test form, but it doesn't feel like anyone's under much scrutiny going into the series. Does the 11 starting the first test, Anderson aside, start the last one of the summer? Ben?
Well, 2 things. I think this isn't because it's a must-do-well series for them, but there will be a fair amount of chopping and changing in that fast bowling department just because they'll want to find out as much as possible about those guys. I actually think it might be close to a must-do-well series for Pope, not because there's scrutiny on him at the moment, because, people tend, and rightly, if a guy is like established in the test side, they won't tend to pay too much attention to county championship form. And there is obviously, you can say if in his last 11 many first-class games, he's averaged this, but then you go to the 12th and he, played one of England's great test innings. Equally,
it's worth just saying that on Pope in the county championship, because it normally is assumed that he dominates it, and normally every year he absolutely dominates it. But this year he has played a lot for Surrey, and he's not really done that much. I think he's got 150+ score, and that was at home to Worcestershire, and it was quite an unconvincing innings actually. It was a relatively streaky knock, and I'm just getting the numbers up here. So yeah, Pope's played 7 games and averages 22.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and I think the thing is that why I think it's a must-do-well series is because if he were to start the series poorly, all of a sudden people would notice that, I think, and then they would go back and be like, oh, actually, and also it's just a lot of cricket to have played without a score, like just because of like if that was stretched over a longer period of time, then you'd be like, oh wow, he's gone this long, but it's because it's been condensed. But that is so I think for him, and also because you look at the other batters around the country who are who are doing really well. Like, I mean, Jamie Smith is obviously starting the series as a keeper, but it might possibly think that, you know, if he's as good as England think he is, then they might well think that he's a bit wasted down at number 7 and want to get him up the order, and that would be an avenue to do it. Equally, you know, Dan Lawrence has had a good start to the summer since moving to Surrey. So, and there are candidates out there basically. So I think that that is a possibility. If England struggle a bit and Pope struggles a bit, that would be the one place you would look at. And it has been a little while since he's got a score, so he could do with one.
Yeah, I think with Pope, you know, Hyderabad might be quite a few innings ago, but it wasn't that long ago, and that is a lot of credit in the bank. And it's just reaffirms how good he could be. So even when he isn't getting runs, I think there is always going to be that temptation to just give him another go. They've invested a huge amount in him. He's vice captain of the Test team. I could see him potentially losing his place in the side, but I don't feel like he would fall very far away from it. I think they would just want him to go and make runs in county cricket, and then he'd probably be back quite soon anyway. It doesn't feel like anyone's kind of Test career is on a knife edge at this point, which is often the case when you go into a summer. Obviously, Bairstow's lost his place before we've even started. I'm quite relieved that we don't have to keep having that conversation across the summer. But I absolutely agree with Ben. I think Jamie Smith, they just wanted to get him in. I don't think this is necessarily where they want him to be for the rest of his Test career. And it's especially if his keeping remains to be seen. I mean, I don't think even he knows how he's going to keep in a Test match. He's not done a huge amount of keeping in red ball cricket. And it might be that if his keeping doesn't look necessarily up to standard or as good as it could be, then they might just want to play him as a batter in the not too distant future.
You spoke to him the other day. What should we expect?
Yeah, this was in the middle of Surrey's win over Essex. So he'd very kindly agreed to speak to me after being announced in the squad on Sunday. Obviously, then he went out and scored a century that day, and then he was fielding, and then he was batting again and got 70. So it was very difficult to find a kind of window during the game. But I actually spoke to him about 15 minutes after he got out, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. And we're going to play some of the interview, I think. Yeah. And the audio isn't necessarily going to be the highest of quality for that exact reason. It was all a bit rushed, but he came across as, I wouldn't say arrogant, but like very confident. There was not the kind of giddiness of an England Test call-up. This felt like something that he has been preparing for a while, and that's not hugely surprising. We've been talking about him as a future England player pretty much ever since he made his debut. I think he'll go well as a Test batter. I really do. I think there was a little patch of play. I think you were on commentary at the time, Yas, actually, in the rain breaks on day 3 where he came out and scored 30 or so and must have been only about 20 deliveries and just looked $1 million out there. And I think that is really exciting. And there's that controlled aggression about him that I think he will score runs quickly, but it's not going to necessarily look like he's just having a whack. It's only really this year that his white ball cricket has kind of caught up with his red ball cricket. He generally just plays good, aggressive shots, but hits the ball along the floor a lot. So yeah, and he said, obviously I asked him the awkward question that he's usurped his mate, his teammate as keeper, and he said, you know, Ben Foakes one of the first to congratulate him, and he got called up. Said a lot. He's learnt a huge amount. Did say it actually can be a bit demoralising watching Ben Foakes keep wicket sometime because he does things that you will never be able to do. And he said, you know, Ben Foakes is the best keeper in the world. I'm not going to get to that level. But he said Foakes immediately was talking to him about the bowlers to be keeping wicket to, the conditions at Lords, which, you know, is a mark of Ben Foakes, really. Obviously, he's going to congratulate his mate, but to immediately dive into that detail and start telling him how he can do the job as best as he possibly can, I think is not a surprise to anyone who's spoken to Ben Foakes or dealt with him over the last few years. He's a very nice man who's, as we said before, possibly cost him in the past. But I think in this occasion, they've gone with the right man. And if the keeping isn't quite up to scratch, then they can potentially find someone else further down the line and just pick him as a specialist batter.
Well, here is some of Joe's chat with Jamie Smith.
Obviously, an exciting few days for you. How was the news broken to you that you were in the Test squad?
Just a call from Baz McCullum. We're actually training here for obviously this game. So yeah, it was a very nice call to receive on my drive back home.
There's obviously been a lot of speculation. Did you have any inkling that you were going to be in the squad, or were you?
I guess you're hopeful you're going to be in the squad.
Yeah.
Sort of when your name's banded around, it's quite hard to miss these sort of things in this day and age. Social media, it's quite relentless at times. So you're always hopeful, but I'm not the sort of person that feels you have a divine right to play. You've got to earn that right and just keep going out there and doing as well as you can. I think that's always been my main goal. And if you do get picked, great. But if not, you can't worry about that, because just putting in performances here for me has been the main thing so far. And then come next week, hopefully that focus will change and putting in performances for England.
I think Rob Key said in the press conference yesterday, he said, sometimes you see players who just have a rare talent and you just got to give them a chance, and that you fall into that category. How much confidence does it give you to hear someone in Rob's position say those things about you ahead of a Test debut?
I think it gives you great confidence. I think it's messages from not just him, but from others. I'm sure when we meet up on Saturday and go into the training days before, it'll be the same from a lot of the senior guys there. Using all their experience and knowledge, it would be great to learn from them. I know I'm not going to be the finished article after one game or before one game, so it's going to be great to try and look to improve my game. I felt I've been in a great place for the last sort of couple of years now, especially in red ball cricket. I feel as though I've turned a corner in how I want to go about things and the way it's gone. It's been pleasing, and hopefully being in and around these guys a little bit more will push that on further.
And in a sense, it's one of your teammates' places that you've taken. Obviously, Ben had the gloves in India. What did Ben say to you after you got picked in the Test squad?
No, he's very, very supportive, like he always is. We've done a lot of keeping work together since I joined the staff. He's been amazing at teaching the little tricks and things that him and also Alex Stewart has sort of formed a little group, I guess, at times. He's been really supportive, offering advice straight away of like the bowlers I'll be keeping against and stuff come that first Test. It's obviously very disappointing for him. I think no one really doubts that he's the best keeper in the country, and I don't think that's going to change at all.
I think you've said in the past that you even might be the best keeper in the world, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. Is that an intimidating act to follow in terms of the gloves? Not
at all. To me, he definitely is the best in the world. So there's no point trying to get away from that fact. That is what it is. I think, as I said previously, it's maybe something that's I've not done too many times in my career to date. But yeah, I'm very happy to keep wicket. I've done it on a number of occasions in white ball and in red ball cricket. But yes, it's a great chance for me to go out there. It's an opportunity that I'd be looking to take. And as I said, it's not going to be one of them things where overnight I'm suddenly going to become Surrey wicket keeper and the best wicket keeper in the world. It will take a bit of time just to build into things, and hopefully game by game I keep getting better, and we'll see where we get to come in the summer.
And how much do you think it's benefited your keeping, having played alongside and trained alongside Ben for the last few years and seen how he goes about his business?
Yeah, 100%. Doesn't always give you the most amount of confidence at times when he's doing some things that you probably think no one else can do.
Yeah.
But it's great to have him on the side. Obviously, he's fantastic in what he does, and you learn so much off him. All the tips and tricks, as I said, that comes with it, and the small little details that a lot of people might miss. He seems to pick up on, and again, very open in sharing that advice.
I was looking through your record. I think you've kept wicket in 19 of your 59 first-class matches, so a fair few. And obviously, you've done that a lot more in white ball cricket for Surrey. When it comes to your keeping specifically, is there a sense that you, in red ball cricket, might have to learn on the job in the way that Matt Pryor, Alex Stewart himself would have said that they did? That's something you're going to have to learn as you start playing more red ball cricket as a first-choice wicket-keeper? Yeah,
it's not necessarily learning on the job. As I said, I've done it numerous times in red and white ball cricket. It's more just the differences it will be if 5 days, and it hasn't been something that I've done necessarily regularly.
How challenging is that physically to do a 4-day or even 5-day?
Yeah, it's no one's going to sit there and say it's totally easy, but given the fact of most wicketkeepers back down at number 7, especially in Test cricket, it gives you that opportunity to rest a little bit. And as I said, it's a great opportunity. I'm not sure when I'm out there with all the nervous energy and excitement, I'll be worrying too much about fatigue. I think it will be a great occasion and something I'm really looking forward to.
You can read the full write-up of Joe's interview with Smith in the upcoming Wisden Cricket Monthly that is out later this week. Just finally on the England-West Indies series, I just wanted to draw attention to something Johnny Grave, the chief executive of Cricket West Indies, said the other day at the MCC's World Cricket Connects Symposium. The first one of those. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but it sounds important. Where he basically said that there should be revenue sharing around international tours. So when they won that test in Australia earlier this year, it was a tour where they actually lost $2 million. Not something that Cricket West Indies can do that often. And Graves said that there are a number of measures to ensure competitive balance and ensure that the three formats thrive. I think the easiest thing to do is say, well, this format doesn't make money or isn't sustainable in this market or that country. But if the game works together and has a collective mindset, there's plenty of money to go around to ensure the game can thrive. But I think Richard Gould's point around being open to sharing revenue is a massive positive, because when we were talking about sharing revenue, we're talking about three countries that have the bulk of it. I think it's bonkers that touring sides don't get paid for these tours anyway. When the home nation's broadcast revenue is entirely dependent on the visitors playing, and they are worth more, the broadcast contracts, if the series are more competitive. So it is in your interest to make sure that touring sides are more competitive. I can't believe that it's just still in 2024 an explorative point in discussions.
Yeah, I mean, it seems blindingly obvious, really. I only read that this morning. I was wondering what cases in other sports, whether in rugby, for instance.
So I know in rugby there are sometimes issues like the Pacific Island teams who are, super exciting with how they play, and there have been instances, I think, where teams have actually given up their match fees so that these players get paid better, but that's not been the norm. So
okay, so basically it's the same as cricket as it currently stands. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's first of all, I think it's fair, and I think these touring teams do deserve some cash for coming over and entertaining us, really. I think that's perfectly fair enough. And also from the perspective of the big three, it's just sensible. If you want to, we've heard this from Rob Key, from Ben Stokes, they want to keep playing Test cricket against these nations. Well, then it's sensible on their part to give them some cash, give them a chunk of all the money they're earning. And we know that the Test summer in England creates a huge amount of revenue for the ECB. If they want those Test summers to continue being the showcase of cricket for that summer, then they need to start sharing it out and making that, effectively future-proofing it.
Yeah, and it's, I guess the argument in the past has been that the quid pro quo has been that you come and tour here, we don't pay you, but the understanding is we go and tour you, and that generates money in that way. But that model just doesn't work anymore. Basically, I think sure, like that, there are some benefit. There are benefits to the West Indies when England tour because there is the tourism factor and that sort of thing. But we know that if certain countries don't get the crowds, or if their broadcast revenues can't demand the same fees, then you've got to look at it a different way of doing it. And that there is a benefit to, as Yas points out, there's a benefit to England and Australia in particular. I think for other sides in the world being really good, and if they're going to in the past, there might have been a way they could sort of sustain themselves in some ways with touring teams. That model worked in the past, and it just doesn't anymore, basically.
And it has such an impact. That will mean that the board not only can keep coming over here, but also will allow them to offer their players more money. So it means that we'll be watching the best West Indians, we'll be watching the best Sri Lankans, we'll be watching the best South Africans. So it is in everyone's benefit to make this work. So yeah, I think it's a really sensible suggestion, and it's encouraging to hear Johnny Grave is the one talking about it, but actually it's been floated by the big three already, or certainly the ECB. I hope it's not one of those things that cricket often falls into the trap of just talking endlessly about these things and thinking, yeah, that's a really good idea. The World Test Championship being a good example. Took them more than a decade to get it off the ground. So if it's a good idea, do it, because this is the time for action. It's not the time for more discussion, really.
Ben, our Charles Tyrwhitt moment of the week is that final ball in one of the most ridiculous first-class fixtures ever. Talk us through what happened, the winning moment, and the context of the game.
Well, I mean, the context of the game was, Glamorgan coming within a whisker of completing the highest first-class run chase of all time, but also, what reminded me a bit of was the New Zealand-England Test match when New Zealand won by one run, having followed on, and how you get all these ridiculous things that somehow come together, like all these rare things that happen in cricket, like combining. So it's like, and somehow that happens. So it's not just a almost chasing the highest ever total. It ended up being the first tie in English county cricket since in 6 years, I think. And it was off the very last available ball of the game as well. And then the way in which it happened was absolutely ridiculous. So because Glamorgan needed one run to win and had 1 wicket left, wicketkeeper James Bracey had taken off one of his gloves. I think it might have been MS Dhoni sort of popularised that move so that he could throw down the stumps in anticipation of a bye. But then Jamie McElroy, the number 11, gets a pretty thick edge on it. So he then has to dive and take an absolutely brilliant catch, one-handed.
And it flies to him. And he's standing closer than he normally would be because he's basically there to stop the bye.
Exactly,
rather than a catch.
And then just sprints off, his arms completely outstretched. And it was, an absolutely brilliant game that had, a brilliant end to the game. I think that I saw some dissent at that description of it because of I think that it was the conditions were basically perfectly set up for this kind of game because it was a really flat wicket, which is what you need if you're going to chase a really big total because it doesn't degrade much, but you also need two teams to have a bit of a batting disaster early on, so it's not just a ball draw. And that's basically what happened. I mean, if you go through and look at those dismissals in the first innings, there's quite a few sort of like caught in the leg side. And so I don't think the conditions were ever too hard for batting. And then Gloucestershire just batted for absolutely ages, and you're like, well, this is sort of fun, but there's not a huge amount of competitiveness in here. You had players scoring. Bracey had got a double 100.
Well, Bracey set up the game as well, didn't he? But he kind of set up the finish 204 not out from 231 balls.
Yeah,
so
I think
turns the game into something exciting.
I think he might. We should probably check this, but I think he might have been the first keeper in first class history to make a double 100 and defect 10 dismissals in the same game. But then because we were talking about it on the third evening when obviously it seems ridiculous chasing almost 600, but when Glamorgan were 222 for 3 at the end of day 3, you actually are thinking this is kind of possible. You've got Sam Northeast, who is like kind of the best batter in the world at going absolutely massive, which is what they needed him to do. And you had Marnus Labuschagne, who is one of the best players in the world as well, both unbeaten either side of 50. Labuschagne ends up making 119, Northeast 187. At one point you think, okay, Northeast is going to do this not comfortably, but he's going to do it himself. He gets out towards the end, and then Mason Crane plays an absolute blinder, basically 43 not out from a guy without loads of batting credentials behind him. Had to also marshal the number 11 in that final over, sort of turn down the single at one point, and then
I thought
took
that
the
was
single.
Insane. I thought that was completely insane. You got 2 runs to win. Get the run.
Get the one run.
Get the run.
I guess
because that would also guaranteed at least they get the tie, which he left open until
the final ball. Yeah, that's true. I mean, maybe
2 runs to win and you're declining a single.
Yeah, well, we won't talk about India Zimbabwe right now, but that was an even crazier thing in that game. But this was but still he batted very well, and it was just an extraordinary finish and great to see one of those county moments that kind of achieves a bit of cut through. Everyone's like because of all the factors that combine to make it so brilliant that everyone was just able to say like that's already an amazing game, and it ended in like basically the most exciting way and interesting way possible. It was just an amazing thing, and
another great moment for live streaming that otherwise would have just had to look at a scorecard and think, oh, that would have been exciting, whereas actually now you can see Bracey tearing off Imran Tahir style, and I mean obviously there's not a huge crowd there by any means whatsoever, but it's a great moment in a great round of games. Actually, I'm sure we'll come on to some others, but a really good. Often it's a bit weird having this mini Red Bull session in the midst of the blast, just 2 rounds of games before you go back to it, but some great win for Worcestershire, great win for Somerset as well.
I was going to say on the final thing on this game, just really happy for James Bracey. Like he's had a couple of really tough years, clearly a very talented player, still only in his mid-20s, so still time to come again as a cricketer. And it wasn't just that winning catch, it was that double 100 set the game up. A couple of other results. Surrey beat Essex in the top of the table Division 1 clash, and for a second it looked like their lead in the table would be pretty significant with only 5 rounds of games left, because it looked like Somerset were miles behind their game against Warwickshire. Somerset, who were in 3rd place before this round of fixtures, and as Joe just said, Somerset in the end chasing 413 against Warwickshire to put them now second in the table, 23 points behind Surrey, including an amazing 100 from Tom Abel, an unbeaten 152 from number 4. Tom Banton scored 81 from number 5. He's going really well in red ball cricket this year. And James Ruse struck 57 not out from number 7. They chased that down, going at 4.5 runs and over. So huge win there. And Somerset looked like a really, really good side because they've struggled in the batting department for the last couple of years. But Banton's resurgence as a red ball player, Ruse introduction last year has helped them. They just look like a much more solid outfit.
Abel ended that game with 4-4-6-6 to chase down, 413. A massively important clash for the County Championship, and because of the Gloucestershire Glamorgan game, no one was even really watching it, I think. But
you're right to point out that Worcestershire got a really important win over Durham at Chester Street. Low scoring game up until the final innings. Durham got 190 in their first innings, Worcestershire 112 in theirs. In the end, Worcestershire needed 231, which looked like a lot given that there was only one team total of more than 155 going into the final innings, and in the end they get there only 4 wickets down. It was a crucial result down towards the bottom of the table. I think they're still in the relegation zone. Let me just double check that.
Yeah, they are it's in the relegation by 5 points, but yeah, Kashif Ali again, brilliant game for him. So 2 half centuries, including an unbeaten 76 to seal that chase. He's really talented.
It's a great effort for them to still even be within touching distance. They have a horrible run of injuries. Obviously, they've had the absolute tragedy of Josh Baker's death as well, which I guess puts anything on the field in context. But it must be just very hard to turn up to work and continue doing this. And I think Joe Leach is out for the whole season. I think I'm right in saying certainly unlikely to play again. Who's really their kind of talisman with the ball. So to pull that result out against a very very, very good Durham side who not that long ago we were talking about as potential title contenders. It's a really, really impressive win from Worcestershire. I'm really pleased with them.
Yeah, and that the table's really split into 2, really, isn't it, as well? Like, you'd say that Worcestershire are 5 points off Warwickshire, but there's actually only 11 points between them and Durham, who are in 5th. You wouldn't be that surprised if any of those teams gets pulled into a bit of a scrap. And then there's an 18-point gap going up to the top 4, but then actually you've got Surrey, obviously there's a bit of distance between them and Somerset, but Hampshire are 8 points off Essex then 6 points off Somerset. Hampshire, 37 points off. Sorry, that is a very, very big gap. But heading into the last sort of stretch of the season,
when availability actually is at its weirdest, particularly for a team like Surrey, when you've got test squads, white ball squads at the same time, they could potentially be without a lot of players.
I think unfortunately for Kent, the table's cut into 3.
Yes,
really, I think they're in a league of their own and not in a good sense.
Yeah.
Again, they've had a horrible run with injuries to their seamers, but Daniel Bell-Drummond, after the defeat to Lancashire, they lost by an innings in the previous round of games. And I didn't actually see the interview, but I read the quotes, and he just said, basically, we're not really, our bowlers aren't good enough for this league. And that's a very tough thing to fight back from. I think they've done well to stick around, really, but I think this is going to be 1 year too far for them.
Joe, there's a new magazine out this week. What is in it?
Yeah, it's out on Thursday in time for day 2 of the Lord's Test. The heart of it is a West Indies special. Looking ahead to the series this summer with the interview with Jamie Smith that you just heard. And Katia spoke to Jayden Seals as well. Really interesting interview talking about his return after being as Ben said earlier, the bright young thing, and then spending 2 years on the sidelines, and now he's ready to go again. It was brilliant for Sussex earlier this season. I spoke to Andre Cooley about the batting department as well. And then we take it back a little bit as well. We've got Daniel Norcross has done a really good piece looking back at the Blackwash series of 40 years ago. He's sort of done it in tandem with Graham Fowler, who opened the batting during that series, who describes in it his relief at the end of the series that he was not injured more than anything. Relief that he'd just got through it relatively unscathed, because that wasn't true of all the England batters in that series. So that's the heart of the magazine. And we've also got an interview with Owen Morgan by Mel Farrell, largely reflecting on England's T20 World Cup campaign and where they go from here. He says that he thinks Mott and Butler should stay on. Doesn't see any better options out there. Thinks that they need time to grow into the role, which is interesting, because Morgan has been quite critical of the management at the 50 over World Cup. Doesn't really feel like they've solved that yeah, he thinks they're the team to continue. There's a bit more World Cup content. Lawrence Booth considers where it went wrong for Butler's team, and Andrew Miller writes on India's triumph and how the rest of the world should be grateful that India are winning world titles, because it's actually quite good for the game in general if India put international cricket at the heart of everything rather than the IPL, which I thought was an interesting take on it. Got the county files, all 18 counties covered in detail, and a really good column from Mark Ramprakash on the Blast. He's upset about the way the Blast has been treated. I think it's probably fair to say that he's not a huge fan of the 100, and he sees the detrimental effect it's had on the Blast. I don't think he thinks the ECB are taking it seriously as a competition and would be quite happy to see it wither away. And I know that's reflected in the views of a lot of county members who see a tournament that no one is fighting for. But he did talk about the perspective of players and coaches, and that actually the Blast is still hugely important within county dressing rooms. They still really care about it, particularly that tier who aren't yet playing in the 100. That is still the big one for them. And you look at county resources and how they're spent, a lot of counties still prioritise the Blast over the county championship. So there is still something worth fighting for, but he's not convinced the ECB are the ones who are going to be doing the fighting.
And anecdotally, it does feel like Blast attendances have been down this year. There have been a couple of games on television that I know that people have remarked upon how poorly attended those have been. There have been fewer sellouts at bigger grounds. And I do wonder if, I don't know, there was a brief boost in sort of feel-good factor around the Blast, I think maybe in response to the start of the 100, but now that we're slightly further into the 100's journey, when you have ticket prices that are similar at the bigger grounds, maybe it's a different story at the non-test grounds. But
and coinciding with the T20 World Cup,
yeah,
this summer I think was going to be tricky to get much attention. Although you wouldn't think that would impact on ticket sales so much, but I think it definitely does in terms of the media cut through that it gets. A really interesting one from Rob Smythe. The next one is Mining for Gold series, where he digs through the cricket database. So he's picked out a selection of cricketers who had unexpectedly brilliant test records against the world's very best. So this is Hansi Cronje kept getting Sachin Tendulkar out, and some stuff which I knew that one, but there was some other stuff that I wasn't aware of. Like John Crawley has got an unbelievable record against Murali and Warne, like the best that's existed, and you know, from a smallish sample size, but also with enough cricket in there for it to mean something. And another good one was Andre Nell.
Yeah.
Who had a brilliant record against Lara, our mate Brian, who was in the office last week. I did mention to Brian that this I was subbing the piece whilst he was sitting opposite me reading his book, which was a slightly odd scenario. And I mentioned what because Rob has interviewed Andre Nell for the piece, and I said, "Oh, we got something on you here. Andre Nell used to get you out quite a lot." He says, "He's like, I don't remember any dismissals of that." So it wasn't quite as big a thing for him as it was for Andre Nell, unsurprisingly. And I think Lara got a few runs against him as well, in fairness. Other bits and bobs, I've started a new series on how the game is tackling the climate crisis. So my first piece is on Lords and what they're doing there. And I'm going to be going around not just English cricket, but international cricket, looking at what teams, clubs, cricket boards are doing to try and, make the situation better than it is, with the background always that the ICC are doing, from my take, very, very little. So yeah, that's been, I don't know if enjoyable is the right word to put there. Actually, it's quite depressing, but it's been enlightening to do. And topically, just after the general election, we had a piece from a freelance writer called Oliver Price, who's looked back at Ted Dexter standing to be a Tory MP, which is a hilarious read. Ted Dexter was not a man suited for politics, did not get in.
As always, you can get Wisden Cricket Monthly from the link we leave in the description. That is everything from today's podcast. Cheers, Joe. Cheers, Ben. Kia want to help you get closer to the action and create inspiring memories that will last a lifetime. Last year, Kia launched a competition to give young cricket players the opportunity to play at the inspiring Kia Oval, and this year they want to do it all again. The Kia Young Cricketer competition is an amazing experience for 11 to 16-year-olds to live out their cricketing dreams. The day will consist of a morning coaching session from Surrey's fantastic coaching staff before an afternoon tournament on the iconic outfield itself. If you are aged 11 to 16 and want to experience this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity on September the 14th, all you need to do is enter the link that we'll leave in our description.